Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to discuss a topic that I've had a few significant clients talk about and their perspectives, and I've seen lots of comments on some of our other videos about it, and so I figured I would cover the future of the EU, what it's likely to be, whether it's likely to break apart, in what time frames. And this, of course, has lots of repercussions in terms of thinking about where we should invest in residencies, citizenships, what we might look at in terms of currencies, etc. So before I get started, I would like to ask you to put in the comments below, don't be influenced by my position, what do you think? A, will the EU survive? B, if it will break apart, I'd love to know how long you think it will be before that happens and what that process will look like. And I would especially love to hear, I think always to me the more interesting thing than a person's answer is the reasoning behind their answer, right? That's where we can kind of go and dive in and go back and forth. So I'm going to give you mine in just a second, but put yours there first. Before we get started, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. Thank you for subscribing to our channel. It's fantastic. And if you would like help with relocating abroad, with getting residencies and citizenships, optimizing your taxes, paying the lowest legal amount of tax possible, etc., please reach out to us. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below. Or send a message through our websites, offshorecitizen.net and offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, so in my opinion, it is highly likely that the EU does break up, at least to a large extent. I could foresee a future under which there was like a Scandinavian Union, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark. Maybe you look at Belgium, Netherlands. Like, these countries are sufficiently ideologically similar like economically, etc., that I can see there's a lot of reasons where there's a payoff there, and it isn't a lot of reason that they would break apart, right? However, I think there is a pretty obvious case that you have a lot of tensions in terms of the ideologies between different parts. You have, obviously the ones we've seen recently are Poland and Hungary not being along the same lines of European values that, whether it's Germany or Netherlands or Belgium, etc., tend to espouse. We saw this hit a certain level when you had Poland state that Polish law supersedes EU law. And so, then there was a talk that, hey, maybe the EU should kick them out. And one of the things that I'm really curious about is how long it will be before the EU kicks other countries out as opposed to the opposite. So there's a lot of people who talk about, Brexit and other countries departing the EU, but very little about the possibilities of the EU kicking other countries out. Now, if you look at the trend of countries entering the EU, this is clearly slowed, right? You had, for quite a period of time leading up to the early 2000s, quite a number of countries were added, and there's basically been none since then. And there isn't a lot of indication that there will be a bunch in the future. Montenegro is probably the closest. Realistically, it's probably 5 years away, and there's a bunch of reasons to believe that it may not get into the EU. And the EU could be dramatically in a different position 5 years from now. So I don't see a lot of fresh blood to replenish the Union if countries start dropping off. At the same time, there's pretty obvious economic tensions. You have a bunch of countries like Spain, Greece, etc., that really only survive economically because of the fact that they're supported by countries like Germany. And I think that just gradually creates a tension which is difficult to manage. The counterbalance is that they want to do things at some point to improve themselves, and they're hamstrung in their ability to do that. And this, I don't think, is going to work out particularly well. So I would guess that you will see some tensions with Eastern European countries and Southern European countries. Southern European countries probably being the more significant in there. And that is ultimately going to kind of cause a gradual crumbling. However, I do not believe that this is imminent. So some people think, it's going to happen this year and things like that. I would apply, one of the things that I've noticed in studying financial markets is that bull runs tend to last longer than I would expect. Debt crises tend not to develop until later than you expect. You can kind of go and look at, what was the movie Inside Job or something, where they chronicled what happened with the 2008 financial crisis and how people were betting on things going down in like 2006, And it took until 2008, September 2008, when Lehman Brothers went down, for the cards really to tumble. So it's pretty amazing the extent to which they can keep things going for a long time. And we've obviously seen a prelude with UK, where even after voting for Brexit, the process of getting out was quite lengthy. And so I would expect that it's going to take quite some time. I think you can apply maybe the Lindy effect to looking at this. So that for those of you who aren't familiar, the concept of the Lindy effect is the longer something has been around, the longer it's likely to be around. So for example, the fact that people have been using forks since around 1400 or 1200, something like that, means that probably 1,000 years from now, even though we advance technology a lot, people are probably still going to be using forks. It's a fairly logical conclusion. Whereas things that haven't been around for so long will tend not to last very long. And so if you consider, okay, the EU is about 30 years old, I would expect that it hits its ultimate throes within that 30-year window. Would be kind of like one way of guesstimating this. I would think that you'll probably see breakup or tensions reach a point where there's other countries separating much sooner than that. I think it would be a gradual, just like you can kind of think about it the same way, right? It came together gradually, and I think it will come apart gradually. I think that's pretty likely. I think this is obviously bad for the euro, right, over the long term. Although I think in any given short period of time, the euro might outperform. In the long term, that's pretty negative for the euro. I think the clear winner from the EU breaking up is Russia. I think that you're likely to find yourself in a situation where actually the US probably also to some extent benefits, because the euro represents an alternative currency to the US dollar. So when that comes apart, what do you end up with, right? This makes it quite different. And so yeah, that would be my forecast. My forecast would be probably in the next 10 years, we have some sort of difficulty. It's terrible to make predictions, really tough, because the crystal ball is broken and we're incredibly bad at it. But this being said, if I was to look forward, I think that you'll have fairly significant problems with it over the next 10 years, and that you'll kind of have this gradually expiring process over the next 30 years. Like I said, with the major piece being, I could see a stronger impetus for principally the Scandinavian countries, maybe down as much as Germany and Austria, kind of being together in some sort of a union. I think it's hard to argue that those don't have a lot of reason to maintain a certain degree of cohesion. Obviously, not all of them are part of the Eurozone, and so you have some trade-offs in that regard as well. Now, the other thing to ask is, why would this happen? And here I think we have, the union was brought together as it's like a tough to do experiment, and it's very fragile. It's held together probably more tenuously than a lot of people realize. This is my perspective. And I think one of the things not a lot of people are talking about is the change of leadership due to demographics over time. So imagine that you were to go back, say, 50 years. If 50 years ago, more or less what would happen is you would have a changing of the leadership every 20 or so years, right? That was basically like how long it would take to cycle out new employees. And so you'd have this generation of new leaders come in. And so you had, from one to the other. But something different happened where the baby boomers never retired. If you think about you can see this globally, not just in Europe. If you were to look at the US, for example, during the last election, if Trump had been elected, he would have been the oldest president. Biden was elected, he was the oldest president, and they're not alone. You had Bernie Sanders, you have Nancy Pelosi, you have a variety of old politicians, a lot of old politicians. And just by pure demographics, it is impossible that this is going to continue. So Biden was elected at 78, he's the oldest president in history. By the time the next election comes around, he'll be 82. At most he can do one more term, and then you're pretty much out of it. We've seen Malaysia has the oldest in general, so they've really pushed the limit. If you go and look, they had people over 90, kind of crazy. But here we had Angela Merkel famously just retire. And I think one of the things is that when people grow up, some people will point to the fourth turning generations, these books. I'm not an enormous fan of the fourth turning, But that's being said, the idea that people grow up with generational influences which then shape their life and their perspective, I think is quite relevant and true. And so you have a group of people who grew up kind of in the wake of World War II, went through the Vietnam War, the Korean War, a bunch of these things. They have a different sense of what it's like not to be in a connected world than people today. People today kind of take peace for granted, and I think that's not good. Second of all, they understand how hard it is to pull people together and to build something like this, and it's not easy. So you'll notice the difference in response. At the time when Poland said that the Polish laws superseded European laws, there was a lot of flack from, I believe it was Netherlands, et cetera, saying, hey, kick them out. And Angela Merkel was the one who said, whoa, let's calm down. We need to figure out a way to work together. It's not good to be so hasty in this and aggressive. Like, this is an important thing to keep together. I don't see that the new generation of leaders who's coming up share that. And you're going to see the turnover over the next about 15 years where you'll have skipped basically Gen X, right? You'll have gone from the baby boomers, skipping Gen X, going to Gen Y, millennials, et cetera, and these will be the people who run it. And there's a different set of ideologies. There's also a different set of experiences, and that's going to tilt us in a very, very different direction as a society. And I don't see the EU surviving in that environment. So I would love to hear what you guys have to think. If you have questions, again, put them below. If you have comments, put them below, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you on the next video.